We're with Brian Longhurst. Okay.
Let me just get these near to hand.
Okay. So what made you, Brian, good afternoon, what made you pursue spiritual path in the first place?
Well, I've been aware of the reality of the spirit world since childhood, and had some mystical experiences in childhood. And then when I was 19, I went to Canada, and this was all being organized from spirit without me knowing it, but I was led there to reconnect with a lady called Mary Olga Park, who became my spiritual mentor. She was from England, and she moved to Canada when she was 19, 54 years before I moved to Canada, age 19. We were brought together and realized that we had a connection. She had had many manifestations of the living Jesus and others from the realms of light. And then I was brought into contact with her by having her book placed in my hand from spirit in a bookshop in Vancouver, and it was called Between Time and Eternity. When I saw that, I knew that I had to read this book because I was interested in eternity. Anything to do with eternity, I wanted to know about it. So I read this book, and I went back and the lady in the bookshop had said to me, the author of this book lives in Vancouver. So I went back to the bookshop and said, I want to meet this lady. So, but I can't find her in the phone book. So she said, her son and my husband both work together at the post office. So I happen to know that her son's name is Robert, so we can phone him up, we can find his number. I phoned him up, he gave me his mother's contact number. I phoned her, said, I've just read your book and I have to meet you. I'm bursting with questions. So I went to her house, and as I walked up the steps to knock on her front door, I was filled with the peace of heaven, a heavenly peace which I'd never experienced anything like it before. And so I knew that I had arrived at the place where I belonged, and she became my spiritual mentor. We had a connection. And I discovered, that was in 1965, and in 2007, I discovered that it was revealed to me from Spirit that she had been my sibling sister in an incarnation in the 1500s, here in England. So she said to me, my job is to get you hooked up with Jesus. And she spoke about him in ways that I'd never heard anybody speak about Jesus before. This was nothing to do with religion or the church. And my love for him grew as a result of the things that she told me about him. And I wanted to know him as she obviously knew him, not just hear about him from other people. I wanted to get to know the real Jesus and experience him in my life. So I would kneel at my bedside every night and pray to Jesus and say, I want to experience you as the living Jesus that I know you really are. And this went on for about some months. And one night, after I'd finished this outpouring from my heart to him, I got up. I was living in basement lodgings in Vancouver, and I started making ready for going to bed, and suddenly he was there in the corner of the room, manifested in his glory. I knew instantly who it was. It couldn't have been anyone else. And as I became aware of him, he was about 4 or 5 meters away from me. It was a large basement area in this house. As he started moving towards me, he wasn't walking, he was floating. He was a few centimeters above the ground, gliding. And as he moved towards me, he spoke. And he said words that I discovered later were from the book of Revelation, chapter 3. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come in to him and will sup with him, and he with me. Now, by the time he finished speaking those words, he was this close to me, eyeball to eyeball, and looking into his eyes was looking into eternity. And the love from him was so great that there are no words to describe what divine love really is. Perfect love, unconditional love. And I was completely enveloped in his aura. His aura of love completely surrounded me and enveloped me. And I felt as if my heart had grown to the size of a football, and I felt as if my chest was going to burst with the love and the joy. It was, love is at that level is so powerful that it's almost, when we're in an embodied state, akin to pain. More than that, this was his love for me gave me an experience which can only be described as an orgasm of the soul. This is nothing to do with sex or a bodily orgasm. This is your entire being filled with that intense love, ecstasy. And this goes on. This is what we're now in the age, in the stage of the awakening of humanity back into that state, that condition, which is heaven, eternity. And this goes on forever. It's indescribable. The world knows nothing about this. So I carried on visiting Olga Park for 5 years. She became my tutor, and she said, my job is to get you hooked up with Jesus. And after I left, as I walked away back to my car from that first visit, Jesus spoke to Olga, and he said to her, speak to the young man. I was 20. Speak to the young man often about me and freely, and so that he return to visit you again and again, I will fill his heart with joy beyond the pleasures of earth. Well, I visited, she spoke, and he filled my heart with joy beyond the pleasures of earth. That was in early 65. I carried on visiting. In October 66, every time I visited, we would go to her prayer sanctuary and pray. And in October 66, as we were praying, Olga said to me, Jesus is here. I didn't have awareness of him at that time, because this was prior to his manifesting to me, which was January 67. And Olga said to me, Jesus is here and he's speaking to you. I will tell you what he's saying and you can answer him direct. So she said, Jesus is saying to you, what is your desire? Well, I was quite intimidated by this, because I thought I'd better get this answer right, otherwise I could be in trouble. Because, the church says, we're all for the high jump. So I said to him in a rather stumbling way, well, my desire is to do your will according to whatever you want me to do. And he said in reply, via Olga, that isn't actually the way it works. the way it works is you have come into this life bringing with you potential to accomplish certain things. My job is to help you to fulfill that potential so that in due course you will bear much fruit according to the will of God. That was October 66. In January 67, that's when he manifested to me in that basement suite. And I've been on a journey with him ever since. He has told me over the decades, that's 51 years ago, he's told me over the decades that all that I have been experiencing, which was amazing, he would teach me, he would tell me things that that I was ready for. And so he carried on for the last 50 years. I've been on this journey, one-on-one journey with him, and he's been preparing me for whatever my mission was, which I didn't know. I didn't know what lay ahead, but he said on a number of occasions over the decades, that which you are experiencing is merely preparation for that which lies ahead. This is an operation of hiddenness. When the moment is right, it will become an operation of openness. This will be a process that is beyond your control, but when it happens, you will know immediately that this is that moment. And anyway, so then by the late 1990s, I'd had so many experiences, amazing tutoring and miracles and experiences of the living Jesus, that I knew I had to write a book sharing. Because I knew that if I came to the end of this sojourn with a body without having at least made an attempt to share with anyone else who was interested, when I was breathing my last, I would know that I would be filled with regret that I hadn't made the effort to share all this. So then in the small hours of my 61st birthday, June the 5th, 2005, I was awakened in the night by Jesus speaking to me at length, and he gave me the words which appear in this, at the beginning of this book, Seek Ye First the Kingdom, and which I have entitled the allegory, an allegory of human spiritual life, called The Caterpillars and the Butterfly. And of course, we're the caterpillars and Jesus is the butterfly. And he's come to tell us we're not really caterpillars, we're really butterflies, just the same as him. There is no difference between us and him. And of course, all the caterpillars didn't believe him and said, you know, who is this? He's off his head, blah, blah, blah. So I came down, this was summertime, so it was light, early. So I came down and typed this out verbatim. It was so powerfully in my mind. Typed it out, and I emailed it to a friend of mine in Florida, Owen Waters, who runs a website called Infinite Being. And I didn't tell him anything about how it had been written, where it came from, nothing. I just typed it out and I emailed it to him. Because, you know, we talked about spiritual matters, he had a website about spiritual matters, he's written spiritual books. So I sent it off, thinking that he might find it interesting. Well, within hours, bearing in mind they're 5 hours behind the UK, he emailed me back and said, Brian, this is fantastic. May I please have your permission to share this on I write a weekly article, which I send to my address list on email. He's got tens of thousands of people around the world on his mailing list. Well, as soon as he said that, he said, I'll credit you and all the rest of it. As soon as I got that email, I knew that that was the moment of the switchover from the operation of hiddenness to the operation of openness, because he was going to share everything that I had written, spoken to me by Jesus, around the world with thousands of people. So that's what he did 2 weeks later. And he said, I will credit you, and if anybody wants to contact you, if you're open, please let them know. So I said, well, more than that, I have written a manuscript for a book, 80,000 words it was then. It ended up being 120,000. And anybody who's interested, you can tell them that I will happily share that manuscript with anybody. Well, within days, I was inundated with inquiries from people saying, all my life I have been searching to find out who the real Jesus is. In one message, you have told me not only who he is, but what our relationship to him is. And so, will you please, in response to your offer, I'd be very pleased to receive your manuscript. And so that started me off in the operation of openness, sharing all my experiences with people around the world. And so then my first book was published in 2012, and a year or two later, people started saying to me, 3 people in 3 weeks said to me, when are we going to get another book from you? Because what you've shared is amazing.